Gospel according to St. Mark, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them has contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live in." The Gospel of the Lord. So this week's lectionary pairs together 2 texts, both of which are about widows, both of whom are on the verge of death, and both of whom have very, very little left to give, either emotionally, materially, or spiritually. And yet, the stories tell us that they do. They give everything that they have. Now, if you've ever heard these stories before, it's possible that you're thinking I am about to launch into the traditional stewardship sermon that reminds us that if a poor widow can give her sacrificial bit for the Lord's work, then how can we, who we are all much, much more comfortable than these widows, how could we not give so much more? Well, there may be some validity to that statement. But what is also true is both of these widows are willing to give up the whole of their lives. Not a percentage, not a portion, not a tithe, but rather they each respectively give their whole life. All that they had to eat, all that they had to drink, all of the money they had, everything they had to live on. None of us can give that. We do a disservice to the widows by rationalizing their offerings, and I believe that we miss part of their life story. So first, I would like to start with the widow from Zarephath. And so let's make sure that we have all of our preconceived notions about what's actually going on in this story cleared away. This is a traumatized woman. She is fighting poverty. She's completely despondent, and she's heading home to face death with her child. She has all but given up, and then this jerk shows up, right? Elijah shows up, and he demands a drink of water. He demands that she's going to make him bread, and then he hangs out in her house where he is clearly not wanted. And I did mention, right, she's on the verge of death, and now she's taking care of this guy. Additionally, part of the story that's very, very important we don't have in our bulletin. The widow's son does actually die. And the widow is convinced that Elijah came to the house to bring God's judgment upon her. So Elijah's sort of a jerk. And frankly, God sort of comes off as a jerk too. I mean, after all, God is the one who sent Elijah to the widow. Now in hindsight, we all know that Elijah nor God are jerks, and it all sort of works out in the end. But initially, they both seem to be adding more trauma to a horrific situation. And then when we think about the other widow, the people in the temple, they're not any better either. If you think about it, this woman gives her last 2 cents to the temple, and then she slips away to die. And we have historically applauded this. It may not say that she went away to die, but Jesus tells us she will die unless someone is going to do something about it. His precise words were, she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. And nobody responds. She's not going home to anyone who's going to care for her or provide for her. There's no magical pot of bread that's going to keep on multiplying. She is exposed and vulnerable in every way imaginable. And they stand there, and they let it happen. This makes no sense to me. So I would like us to consider these two widows differently than we have in the past. And I would like to start with the term that we use to describe them, widow. So if we were asked to define widow, we all know what this is, right? This is defined as a woman whose husband has died. That's our basic linguistic understanding of it. Well, the fascinating thing about language is if you look at the evolution of words and the root words, and you can sort of see the diverse meanings that each word holds, you begin to get a fuller understanding of what's actually going on, why something is called what it is. Well, my mom did her undergraduate work in English, so my childhood was marked with proper language, grammar, and word study. Unintentionally or intentionally, she planted a fascination of verbiage within me. So this love of words made me pause as I discovered that the Hebrew word for widow is derived from the Hebrew word meaning to be mute. The connection suggests that widowhood creates a sort of social muteness. Throughout the ages, we have heard these widows' stories laced with a tone of resignation to reflect their assumed social muteness. But what if we've missed the voice of the widows, their true voice? Since the Bible hardly uses adverbs, we make assumptions about the tone of things. But I can't find any reason that these passages couldn't be read with a tone of opposition and defiance. We have historically read through a lens of human construction, which colors our reading, tells us how things should happen. The truth is, God doesn't often function in shoulds. This is the Bible, the story of God and God's ways. It seems to me that we should read, hear, and interpret through God's voice, not ours, not through our expectations of what a widow should and should not be. So if we climb into their stories and hear their actions in another light, here are parts of their stories. Pennies clamor as they fall from the widow's fingers, and she makes her desperation known. She receives a ring of silent response from those within the temple doors. The dough drops on the wooden table with a loud thud as the widow silently pushes back at Elijah's demands with her own needs. This is her last little bit of hope that he's about to take. But now that her son lies silent in her arms, her wailing sears through Elijah's heart, finally forcing him to take action. The widow's actions sing of dignity and courage. Their costly offerings denounce the ways of injustice and favoritism. The widow's actions are prophetic in their own right. And I'm pretty sure that make a lot of noise is the number one item needed on the job description of prophet. These women are anything but voiceless. Now, obviously, what I've done is I have conflated two women into one singular character, highlighting the strong polarity which resides within both of them. And so for the sake of ease, I'm going to call her the widowed prophet. And the widowed prophet is a feisty, gusty agitator of the system, and she isn't going easily. If you notice, Jesus never applauds her self-sacrifice or invites us to follow in her footsteps. I mean, if you look, he never ever says those things. That's what we said that he says, but Jesus doesn't. What Jesus does do is he notices her and hears her silent cry, and tells others to see and hear her also. The offering wasn't only a little bread, or a little shelter, or a few pennies, but also the widowed prophet offers the gift of noise, because she makes us uneasy with her unwillingness to acquiesce, her pushing back, and her demands, and her neediness. We like to believe in this exceptional country of ours that all are afforded equal voice and equal opportunity. So when we hear grumblings that it's not true, our defenses goes up, and it causes selective hearing and the sequestering of today's widows. And so the question is, right, who are the widows of today? Those that we would like to ascribe social muteness to. I mean, right, there are people that you would like to shut up, aren't there? The blacks and the Latinos, the gays and the women. I mean, there's more. If you'd like me to, I can list the long, long list of people we would like to shut up. And you're a little bit tired of hearing this, aren't you? Tired of the issue of racism, tired of the issue of sexuality, tired of the issue of feminism. And they all just keep getting brought up over and over and over again. I mean, really, why do they have to make so much noise? Well, here's my tiny example from this past week. And this is just, a very, very small example, but I'm sure you guys will all be able to relate to it. I am a member of a clergy Facebook page that discusses a myriad of topics. And most of the time, this group totally exhausts me because I feel like they whine a lot. Well, this past week, a woman pastor posted a comment expressing her frustration over how the male pronoun is almost always used in referencing a pastor and the assumption that a pastor is a man. As a woman, this gets a little tiring. But I actually didn't really think that much about it. It seemed like a fairly benign statement. You would think that her voice could be heard and she wouldn't be left widowed for expressing the hurt she's experiencing just for being a woman. But that wasn't the case. Some said that women pastors were too sensitive. Some said that women pastors were the Antichrist, or they were satanic. I am not making this up, and yes, it is still 2015. I honestly was shocked, and yet I wasn't. I mean, this is a small example, but we widow people all the time, hoping that they'll just be quiet or get tired and go on about their lives. Those of color, they rally because they have experienced racism, not because they want to be a nuisance. Women make noise because their voices aren't always valued as much as men. The homeless, they bang on our windows because they are actually hungry. The LGBTQ community dances with their rainbow shirts loudly because they too want to celebrate love. They aren't going to allow us to widow them. Recently, I have found myself repeating something in a variety of contexts, which I believe is in some ways the call of the widowed prophet. You actually may have been in a group where I've said this because recently I've said it in racial justice meetings, I have said it in social ministries, I said it in Bible study, I said it last week after our presentation on human trafficking. When we hear something that makes us uncomfortable, something we don't want to hear, something with which we disagree, that's the place that we need to stay. That's the place where the gospel is breaking in. Because the truth is, Jesus didn't come to make us comfortable. In all ways, the widowed prophet is a dichotomy. Prophets have voices and widows do not. Prophets hold a place in society and widows do not. Prophets are chosen by God and widows are forgotten. If you ask me, the widowed prophet sounds a lot like Jesus. The one who was and is the least and demanded a place in the world, demands a place in our lives. The one who was and is the outcast, and now nobody can forget him, even if they want to. The one who was and is the most unlikely to be the voice of God, and yet was and is. Which is how I know the widowed prophet is not going to shut up. She's making a holy ruckus for all the mute ones. Because as Jesus tells us, they will die, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, unless someone does something about it. And I'm pretty sure he's talking to us. Truly, these poor widows gave everything they had to serve a world so broken that it killed them. And a few days later, literally chronologically in the Bible, a few days later, Jesus died himself, giving everything he had to redeem and restore his world so that we might all have life.